Buckingham Palace had survived abdications, divorces, betrayals, and scandals that once threatened the crown itself. But nothing prepared the royal household for the document placed before Queen Camilla that morning. With one official confirmation, every privilege attached to her HRH standing was declared permanently withdrawn under the authority of the 1917 Letters Patent. The Queen did not shout, she did not argue. She simply stared at the page as the future she believed secure disappeared before her. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla held the final page until the paper bent. Shortly after 9, the Palace Communications Office issued a statement applying the 1917 Letters Patent directly to her position. That historic document, created to control who could use princely titles and formal styles, had become the weapon that ended every HRH privilege attached to her name. The announcement left no room for comfort. Her ceremonial precedence, private courtesies, institutional protections, and automatic recognition within the royal household were now gone forever. Minutes before publication, senior royals received sealed copies, giving no one time to intervene, soften the wording, or warn the woman at the center of the storm. Camilla turned toward the aide near the door. Her voice stayed low, but the question carried fear. Had Charles approved every sentence? The assistant hesitated, and that pause gave her the answer she dreaded. Across the residence, the king read the same document, removed his glasses, and lowered himself into a chair without speaking. Charles had spent years defending her place beside him. Now the monarchy had separated his wife from the authority of the crown. The handwritten note beside the legal recommendation made the blow colder. This was not temporary punishment, a symbolic rebuke, or a restriction that could vanish after public anger faded. The order would survive a change of reign, meaning even a future sovereign could not ever casually return what had been removed. Palace staff moved quickly. Camilla's name disappeared from internal precedence lists, briefing papers, and ceremonial schedules for coming months. She watched an aide close one folder, then another, as though pieces of her life were being locked away before she could challenge the decision. Charles finally entered, but he offered no denial. Camilla looked at him, then at the folded announcement between them. The question was no longer whether the ruling could be reversed. The question was, who possessed enough power to force it through despite the king's objections? As she demanded a name, attention shifted toward William, Anne, and Catherine, whose loyalty, ambition, and private wounds had quietly converged. The legal language was cold, but the damage was deeply personal. For Camilla, the decision threatened the identity she had spent decades fighting to secure. For Charles, it represented a devastating judgment on the woman he had defended against public anger and private resistance. And for Prince William, it was the moment when protecting the future of the monarchy became impossible without confronting his father's past. The document had changed royal protocol, but it had also reopened every wound the family had buried. Camilla had spent years climbing from public rejection to royal acceptance, and Charles had carried her through every stage. He defended her when crowds blamed her, protected her when courtiers doubted her, and stood beside her until she became queen. That title meant the sovereign's wife, but the deeper prize had been belonging. Now the palace had taken that belonging apart. Charles entered her sitting room and found her gripping the statement. She asked whether he had fought for her. The king opened his mouth, then stopped. That hesitation cut deeper than any sentence, because she understood what it meant. He had argued, but he had not won. William waited outside the private study with his jaw locked. As heir, he was first in line to the throne, meaning every choice had to protect the crown beyond one reign. Catherine saw the anger in him and quietly warned that he could not enter as a wounded son. He had to speak as the future king. Catherine remained beside him because she understood the cost. She feared the meeting could destroy the bond between father and son, and she knew the fallout would reshape her own duties. If William took greater control, she would become more visible, exposed, and responsible for holding the family together. The restriction reached beyond a style placed before a name. Camilla would lose automatic access to constitutional briefings, private meetings where the monarch receives advice about government and state duties, along with unrestricted entry into certain working arrangements. The loss was practical, public, and humiliating. Charles then discovered something worse. Several senior courtiers had been advising William privately for weeks. Courtiers were trusted palace officials who managed royal duties and protected the institution. Their involvement proved the heir had not acted in sudden anger. He had built a careful strategy. Camilla read that detail twice and felt suspicion replace grief. She no longer believed public image had caused this alone. She demanded the confidential incident report attached to the legal file. That hidden account would lead them back to one ceremony, one forbidden confrontation, and the exact moment she crossed a line the palace could no longer ignore. The decision had not begun with lawyers, constitutional experts, or the wording of an ancient royal instrument. It began 3 weeks earlier, behind the closed doors of St. James's Palace, during what should have been a quiet rehearsal for a national service. One sentence from Camilla changed the atmosphere. One refusal from Princess Anne transformed discomfort into open defiance. And when William entered the room seconds later, he witnessed the exact confrontation that would eventually cost the Queen every remaining HRH privilege. Camilla entered the rehearsal determined to change the order. The national commemoration would place senior royals before the country in an arranged procession, meaning every position carried a public message about rank, service, and trust. St. James's Palace, one of the monarchy's working residences, had become the setting for a battle no one had expected. Anne opened the ceremonial folder and saw her name moved from the leading position. Camilla told her to stand behind members of the Queen's private household, the personal staff responsible for supporting her duties. She insisted that loyalty to the sovereign's wife now mattered more than established custom. Anne closed the folder with controlled force. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, told her that personal preference could not rewrite service, rank, or duty. Camilla heard defiance, not caution, and accused her of undermining every step she had taken since Charles became king. The room tightened around them. Anne's face hardened because the argument was no longer about ceremony. It had become an attack on decades of work and sacrifice. Camilla leaned across the table, removed her name card from the official order, and placed it beside the household representatives. William entered at that exact moment. The prince looked at Anne, then at Camilla, before lifting the card and returning it to its original place. He told everyone that no further changes would be made. The Queen challenged him, but he refused to move. A constitutional advisor documented every word in a formal incident memorandum, a written record created when conduct may affect royal authority or public duty. The account stated that Camilla had issued commands beyond the accepted limits of her role. Worse, it recorded that she had invoked Charles's name even though the king had never approved the order. That detail changed everything. A family quarrel had become a possible constitutional breach, because royal authority had been claimed without the sovereign's consent. When Charles received the report, he read it twice, summoned Camilla and William, and ordered the doors closed. The ancient document had supplied the legal weapon, but their face-to-face confrontation would decide who had the strength to use it. There were no cameras, no secretaries, and no advisors inside the king's private study when the confrontation began. Charles stood between his wife and his heir, hoping his presence could prevent the family from breaking apart. But Camilla arrived carrying the incident report. William entered with the legal recommendation, and within minutes the argument became something far more dangerous than a dispute over ceremony. It became a battle over who had the right to define the monarchy's future. Charles closed the door. He believed privacy could contain the damage before the legal recommendation became official, but the silence sharpened the anger. The recommendation was a formal proposal telling the sovereign what action advisors believed the crown should take, and William had come prepared to defend every word. Camilla placed the incident report on the desk and accused the prince of turning Anne's resentment into a campaign against her. She said the rehearsal had been distorted and used to punish her. William stayed calm. He answered that her own actions had created the evidence, and that invoking the king's authority without permission could never be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Charles cut across him. The monarch ordered his son to stop speaking as though judgment had already been passed. William met his father's stare and said the crown could not protect someone simply because the sovereign loved her. The sentence landed brutally because everyone understood its accusation. Camilla turned toward her husband and demanded a choice. Would Charles defend his wife, or surrender control to his heir? The king moved one hand toward hers, then stopped before touching it. That hesitation exposed the truth. Affection remained, but certainty had gone. William set the legal recommendation beside the report. Charles read the words, "Permanent withdrawal of HRH privileges," meaning the removal of the formal style and institutional courtesies attached to royal rank. He pushed his chair backwards so violently that it struck the cabinet behind him. The prince then disclosed, through the signed advisory record, that Anne, Catherine, and most members of the Senior Royal Advisory Council supported the recommendation. That council was the small group of officials and royals guiding major household decisions. Their support meant this was no private rebellion. Charles learned the final cost moments later. Refusal would trigger resignations from senior officials and expose the complete incident report publicly. Camilla looked at him, waiting. William remained still, as the consequences closed in. The king asked for one final night. By morning, he would choose between protecting Camilla and protecting the institution he had inherited. Yet beyond that locked door, another force was moving through the palace, ensuring emotion would not decide the outcome alone. Camilla believed the final decision rested with the king. She was wrong. Behind the ceremonial grandeur of the monarchy, a quiet alliance had already formed around William, Anne, and Catherine. They did not need raised voices or public rebellion. They possessed something more powerful: constitutional advice, operational support, and a shared conviction that the crown could not survive another crisis built around personal protection. By the time Charles asked for another night, the machinery of succession had already begun moving without him. William stood alone in the late Queen's former private audience room and read the final legal opinion twice. An audience room was a private space where the sovereign received advisors and important guests, but that night it felt more like a courtroom. His constitutional position as heir gave him influence over long-term stability, the future household, and preparations for the next reign. The prince understood the cost. Charles would see his endorsement as betrayal, perhaps even an attempt to seize authority before his time. Yet William believed silence would make him complicit in Camilla's misuse of royal power. His hand shook once before he signed, then he pressed the pen down as though certainty could be forced through ink. Anne entered minutes later and studied her nephew's face. She told him she had never wanted revenge. She wanted a boundary. The Princess Royal had served for decades, and her standing gave the alliance institutional weight. Still, disappointment shaped every word, because the rehearsal had turned service into something Camilla believed she could rearrange. Catherine carried a different kind of power. She understood public trust and how quickly private disorder could become national humiliation. The princess had already approved revised ceremonial schedules, removing Camilla from positions dependent upon HRH precedents, the formal order deciding who stands, enters, or is recognized first at royal events. The change was no longer theoretical. It was ready. Legal advisors then confirmed through a written opinion that the 1917 letters patent could restrict royal styles and privileges when their use threatened the recognized order of the monarchy. That interpretation transformed the alliance from family resistance into an operational plan. Charles entered without warning. He saw William's signature, but neither man offered a greeting. The king lifted the paper, folded it once, and placed it inside his coat. No one in that room mistook his silence for forgiveness or surrender. Hours later, he summoned the private secretary, the senior official who carries out the monarch's formal instructions. Charles spoke one sentence that decided everything: release the announcement at dawn. Morning would bring confirmation. But the first consequences would strike faster, and far more brutally, than anyone inside the palace expected. The loss of royal privilege did not remain trapped inside legal language. It appeared in altered schedules, withdrawn invitations, reassigned staff, and doors that no longer opened automatically. Within hours of the palace confirmation, Camilla watched the structure built around her begin to disappear. The most painful blow was not the public announcement. It was the discovery that the royal household had prepared for her removal so completely that her old life seemed to vanish before she had even accepted it was over. Camilla arrived for a scheduled briefing and stopped in the doorway. Her place card was gone. An aide explained that attendance was now restricted because palace departments had begun applying the ruling at once, preventing confusion over which duties, rooms, and meetings still belonged to her revised position. The Queen understood the cruelty of that speed. Her marriage, private property, and personal life with Charles remained untouched, but her institutional privileges had been separated from the sovereign's constitutional office, the formal machinery through which the king performs duties of state. She could still be his wife. She could no longer move as part of his authority. Camilla's humiliation turned to anger when she learned that two long-serving members of her household had been reassigned without consultation. Those staff members had managed her duties for years. Now the central palace structure had absorbed them as though her household were already being dismantled. Charles arrived after canceling his afternoon engagements. The king found her standing beside unopened boxes and asked her not to leave in anger. She demanded to know why he had allowed the announcement to proceed. He admitted that blocking it would have triggered resignations and fractured the governing household that keeps the monarchy functioning. Camilla removed the diamond HRH brooch from her jacket and placed it between them. The letters represented Her Royal Highness, a style carrying formal rank and royal courtesy. She told Charles that the palace had finally revealed what it believed she was worth. He reached for the brooch, but she pulled her hand away. The restrictions deepened. Camilla's access credentials were altered, and future state occasions would require individual approval rather than automatic inclusion. Then a private letter arrived from Anne. The princess wrote that service could never be replaced by closeness to power. There was no triumph in the message, only judgment. Camilla ordered her belongings packed. Moments later, she changed course. Before leaving, she requested one final private meeting with William, without Charles, advisors, or courtiers present. For the first time, they would face each other with nothing standing between them, and what she planned to ask him could alter the meaning of everything decided. The final turning point did not come in a grand stateroom or before a council of constitutional experts. It came in a small private library where Camilla and William sat across from one another, with no aides present. There were no ceremonial uniforms, no briefing folders, and no one to interrupt the silence. For years, both had carried memories of Diana, Charles, public hostility, and private resentment. Now, stripped of institutional protection, they were forced to speak not as royals, but as two people shaped by the same fractured family. Camilla had requested the meeting for one reason. She wanted to hear from William whether the ruling came from constitutional duty or anger connected to Diana. The prince had agreed because he knew the monarchy could not move forward while the true cause of their conflict remained buried. Camilla asked whether anything she could have done would ever have been enough. William did not answer at once. He finally said acceptance had always been possible, but unquestioned authority had not. She looked down because the distinction exposed the fear behind every battle she had fought. The queen admitted that years of public rejection had made her cling to every symbol of status. Losing influence now felt identical to being erased. William listened, then acknowledged that pain surrounding his mother had hardened his judgment. But he insisted the confrontation at St. James's Palace, not the past, had made formal action unavoidable. Camilla slid the removed HRH brooch across the table. Those initials meant Her Royal Highness, a formal style carrying recognized rank and privilege. William did not touch it. He told her no title could repair what had happened, but dignity could still shape what happened next. Diana's memory remained between them, but neither would allow Diana to decide this moment. Then Camilla disclosed, through the private conversation itself, that Charles had offered to challenge the ruling behind closed doors. She had refused. Another battle would force the king to sacrifice either his marriage or his reign, and she could no longer demand that choice from him. William's expression changed. For the first time, he saw not resistance, but surrender with purpose. Camilla agreed not to contest the decision, though she did not accept every accusation against her. She accepted only that continued defiance would deepen the damage to Charles. William rose to leave. Camilla stopped him and asked for one final chance to address the royal household before the palace announced her withdrawal from public duties. Her choice had transformed the crisis. It was no longer a fight over power, but a reckoning over sacrifice, accountability, and whether the crown could survive the truth. By midday, the decision had escaped the guarded corridors of the palace and entered every home, newsroom, and gathering place in Britain. Commentators argued over law, loyalty, and revenge, while crowds assembled outside royal gates waiting for a sign of what would happen next. Yet one image silenced the debate more effectively than any official statement. Camilla leaving Clarence House without the symbols of HRH rank, pausing briefly before the cameras, and turning back toward the building where Charles remained unseen. Britain absorbed the shock in real time. Broadcasters interrupted regular programs to examine the constitutional weight of using the 1917 letters patent against a reigning monarch's wife. That document was the royal instrument controlling who could hold princely styles and privileges, and its use against Camilla made the crisis feel permanent rather than political. Public opinion split sharply. Some viewers saw accountability at last, proof that closeness to the sovereign could not excuse an abuse of authority. Others believed the palace had chosen humiliation over mercy and punished the queen after years of service beside Charles. Every argument returned to the same painful truth. The crown had defended its boundaries by exposing the private fracture at its heart. The next morning, one front page captured the national mood. A major newspaper printed the abandoned HRH brooch beneath the words, "The Crown chooses duty." Outside Buckingham Palace, hundreds gathered near the gates. Some carried portraits of the late Queen, while others stood silent as a broadcaster read the official announcement aloud. Catherine watched the coverage from Kensington Palace and struggled to hide her emotion. The princess heard commentators describe her as part of the alliance that had removed Camilla's privileges. She had supported the decision, yet she understood that public approval could never erase the suffering inside the family. Charles refused every public appearance. The king watched his wife's car leave, pressed one hand against the window, and did not call her back. His silence protected the crown, but it also confirmed how much the decision had cost him. Camilla answered through a written address delivered directly to the royal household. She accepted the restriction, withdrew from future state duties, and asked staff not to blame Charles. William issued no personal statement. The prince allowed her words and the palace document to stand, signaling that the fight for authority had ended. That evening, the family gathered privately. Charles entered carrying the original announcement, knowing the legal battle was finished. One question remained. Would history remember Camilla's fall as punishment, protection, or the price of preserving the monarchy? Behind closed doors, the king prepared to give the final verdict and settle the family's deepest wound forever. In the end, there was no triumphant victor. Camilla lost the privileges she had spent decades earning. Charles preserved the monarchy but could not shield the woman he loved. William secured the boundaries of the future crown while accepting a permanent fracture with his father, and Anne received the protection of tradition without celebrating another person's fall. The palace ruling ended the constitutional crisis, but its true verdict was painfully human. Within the monarchy, love may influence the sovereign, yet it can never be allowed to overrule the crown. Charles entered the private room where he had once discussed Camilla's future role before becoming king. That symmetry mattered because the space had once represented possibility. Now it held the operational record, the palace file fixing how royal duties must be handled, confirming her HRH status could never be restored under his reign or any reign after it. The king placed the original announcement on the table. He told Camilla he was sorry he could not protect both her and the institution. She answered that forcing him to choose had been her greatest mistake. She asked for no mercy. She only asked him to remember that fear had driven her too far. William told his father the decision had never been intended to destroy their marriage. Charles replied that necessary decisions could still leave wounds, duty would never heal. The prince accepted the rebuke because victory had never been the point. Survival had. Anne approached Camilla before leaving. The Princess Royal offered no apology, and the Queen gave none in return. Anne extended her hand. After a long pause, Camilla accepted it, ending their conflict without pretending the damage had vanished. Camilla withdrew permanently from constitutional briefings, formal state precedents, and ceremonial positions tied to HRH privilege. Those briefings were private meetings, where the monarch received advice on government and national duties. She remained Charles's wife, but never again acted as an independent center of royal power. William assumed greater control over long-term palace planning, while Catherine became the bridge between a wounded household and the monarchy's next generation. Charles kept the removed brooch in a private drawer, preserving it not as a symbol of rank, but as proof of the price paid when personal loyalty collided with public duty. The monarchy emerged diminished, but intact. Camilla accepted the limits of status. Charles accepted the limits of love, and William inherited a crown marked by sacrifice. The final verdict was clear. No person, however close to the sovereign, could stand above the institution. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.